This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Chinese President Xi Jinping addresses global leaders at a biodiversity conference in Kunming, calling on countries to join together in a new journey of green growth. Hong Kong authorities warn residents to be vigilant as tropical cyclone Kompasu makes its approach. And ICJ rules largely in favor of Somalia in a maritime border dispute with Kenya. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. The details on those stories in just a moment, but first, here's Ramanyan with the day's business headlines. Rama.
That's right, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in the next half hour. Remittances to Egypt go up by 70% amid a global economic recovery after the pandemic-induced downturn. And maize prices in Kenya have fallen by at least a quarter as harvesting season starts in the nation's maize-growing regions. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed global leaders at a biodiversity conference in Kunming. Speaking via video to the COP15 summit, he called for countries to join together in a new journey of green growth. CGTN's Tao Yuan has more.
China will invest 1.5 billion yuan, or over 230 million US dollars, to support biodiversity protection in developing countries. An announcement from President Xi Jinping today at the Leader Summit of the United Nations Biodiversity Conference.
In
the face of the dual tasks of economic recovery and environmental protection, developing countries need help and support all the more. China will take the lead and contribute 1.5 billion yuan to set up the Kunming Biodiversity Fund, which will support biodiversity development in developing countries. China calls for and welcomes all parties to contribute and support efforts to strengthen the protection of biodiversity.
The president made the announcement via video link. He also said China would ramp up efforts to build a natural conservation system with a new national park system at its core. The president added that renewable energy development was also a priority.
We will accelerate the planning of large-scale photovoltaic and wind power projects in our deserts and nearby areas. The first phase of these projects, with a combined installed capacity of 100 million kilowatts, will soon begin in an orderly manner.
This week's conference is expected to release a joint declaration to ease concerns over the widespread destruction, degradation, and fragmentation of ecosystems globally. Many countries have already made a commitment to protect 30% of the planet's land and sea area by 2030. They will meet for a follow-on conference in April and May next year and try to agree on a set of goals to help make this happen. An agreement won't be easy as different countries are in different developmental stages, but there's understanding now that decisive actions need to be taken to ensure the well-being of humans as well as other lives on this planet. Taoyuan CGTN, Kunming.
Pollution has far-reaching negative effects on biodiversity. In Egypt, experts say more than 800 living species are endangered and about 26 are on the brink of extinction. In recent years, the North African nation realized that environmental degradation would harm its economy. In 2018, Egypt hosted the Convention on Biological Diversity. It is also a nominee to host the COP27 Climate Change Conference in 2022. Here is Adel Mahroui with more.
From habitats in deserts, mountains to coral reefs, Egypt's biological life is rich. Biodiversity here comprises more than 20,000 species. Yet human activity on the planet is threatening these diverse ecosystems.
What affects us most is the relation between pollutants and climate change that harms plants and can sometimes force changes in the types of crops grown in the region, which in turn would reflect on biological life.
226 kinds of plants, 153 animals, 341 birds and 36 insects are endangered. At least 26 species among those are on the brink of extinction. Lakes are the most threatened ecosystems in Egypt. Because of their slow to non-renewable nature, the impact of aggressive fishing and pollution are evident. Experts say that the rise in sea levels and water temperature directly affects biodiversity in both the Mediterranean and Red Seas.
The Nile Delta in the north is the first area in Egypt where the rise in saltwater levels becomes evident. There, the Nile meets the Mediterranean. Saltwater floats over freshwater, and we've been getting increased reports of soil salinization. When we track the reason, we find it related to the melting of the North Pole.
Adding to that the more than 200 million tons of carbon emitted from vehicles annually and the public burning of waste, air quality is sharply deteriorating, making citizens pay the price.
The biggest pollution impact on humans comes from air pollution. The most vulnerable is the respiratory systems for seniors and children. In Egypt, that used to be very evident because of the deterioration in air quality, which peaks in October to December in what is known as the black cloud. In recent years, the Egyptian government has been assisting farmers to avoid burning agricultural waste after harvest. It introduced revenues for this waste, using it in producing biofuel.
Air pollution is costing the equivalent of at least 1.35% of Egypt's GDP. That's more than $3 billion annually. In recent years, Egypt realized the significant impact environmental issues had on the nation. Taking a more active role, the government has passed laws and increased fines against all violations that threaten its biodiversity. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's return to our headline story, where Chinese President Xi Jinping has addressed global leaders at a biodiversity conference in Kunming. President Xi called for countries to join together in a new journey of green growth. Well, let's get more now on this development. Jason Anthony Nichols, I understand we may have lost that link to the United States, but we will return to our guest in a moment if we can. Now, Hong Kong is on alert as a tropical cyclone Kompasu is expected to make landfall. The same storm has killed at least 11 people in the Philippines. And Cheng has more from Hong Kong.
Well, as tropical cyclone Kompasu continues to gather strength, the Hong Kong Observatory has issued the number 8 typhoon signal. The number 10 signal is the highest and strongest level. So Kompasu is expected to be closest to Hong Kong on Wednesday morning, skirting within 400 kilometers to the south of the territory. So the number 8 signal will likely remain till before sunrise tomorrow. There also may be flooding in low-lying areas, and the sea will be rough with swells. Now, all classes have been suspended. Meanwhile, most wet markets and supermarkets are sold out now because of panic buying, as people have been rushing to stock up on food ahead of the typhoon. People have also been rushing to get home earlier than usual, especially for those living in outlying islands and need to take ferries, so public transport is also starting to crowd up. And since the number 8 signal is raised, the frequency of MTR trains and buses are increased to rush hour levels, and additional station staff are deployed to assist passengers who are trying to get home at crowded stations. The observatory has also advised residents to lock all their windows and doors to reinforce their gates if needed, as well as to use tape on large window panes to help reduce the chance of glass getting shattered. Now, just 3 days ago, another storm, Tropical Storm Lion Rock, was the first storm of the year to generate a number 8 warning. So lasting 22 hours, Lion Rock became the single longest storm with a level 8 signal since 1978. And Chang, CGTN, Hong Kong.
The European Union has pledged a further 700 million euros in emergency aid to Afghanistan. This brings the bloc's promise to help the country to 1 billion euros or $1.2 billion US. The Taliban has been holding face-to-face talks with European Union and US envoys in Qatar. Afghanistan's new rulers are seeking international recognition and assistance to avoid a humanitarian disaster. Zmarilai Abisin reports from Kabul.
The Taliban have been continuously saying they want positive relationships with the region and international community, particularly when we're talking about the European countries, as they step up towards assisting the people in Afghanistan in such dire situation. According to Taliban acting foreign minister Amir Khan Muttaqi, has been emphasizing that no country will face any threat from Afghanistan, and they will be controlling and coordinating all the issues with the international community, whether it's the humanitarian assistance to control the catastrophe in the country, or the diplomatic efforts, or the counter-terrorism. All those meetings have been happening as positive signs, according to the Taliban. Will the extraordinary G20 leaders meeting on Afghanistan is really important in a situation that is right now Afghanistan is going through. Millions of people are in need of food, humanitarian assistance, and every era, the health services, and many more, and it's a looming humanitarian catastrophe happening in the country. It seems like the international community already understand the situation on the ground in the country, and the banks will soon be collapsing if there is no international attention to the situation in the country. So that's all belong to the international community, because Afghanistan has been relied on the foreign aid.
The International Court of Justice has handed its long-awaited judgment on the maritime border dispute between Kenya and Somalia. The UN's top court has ruled largely in favor of Somalia. For decades, Kenya has said that a line due east of where the two countries meet on the coastline marks the maritime border. Somalia countered this in court. A panel of 14 judges said Kenya had not proved that Somalia had agreed to its claimed border. The court instead drew a border at the median point between both Somalia's and Kenya's claimed borders. The ICJ, however, has no powers to enforce the ruling. Last Friday, Kenya announced that it withdrew its recognition of the court's jurisdiction.
The court, 1, unanimously finds that there is no agreed maritime boundary between the Federal Republic of Somalia and the Republic of Kenya that follows the parallel of latitude described in paragraph 35 above. 2, unanimously decides that the starting point of the single maritime boundary delimiting the respective maritime areas between the Federal Republic of Somalia and the Republic of Kenya is the intersection of the straight line extending from the final permanent boundary beacon, PB29, at right angles to the general direction of the coast with the low water line.
And to get a better understanding of the history behind the case, here's Robert Nagila with a backgrounder of the maritime border dispute between both countries.
It's a dispute that threatens the future relations of two neighbors and has far-reaching consequences. The bone of contention, a 38,000 square mile area between Kenya and Somalia, thought to be rich in oil and gas resources. At the core of the dispute is which direction the border runs into the Indian Ocean. Now, Somalia says it should follow its land border that way, while Kenya says it should be in a straight line east. So this bit is in contention. Back in 2009, the two countries agreed to resolve the matter through bilateral talks. But in 2014, Somalia moved to the International Court of Justice at The Hague after negotiations with Kenya broke down. Kenya says the area is part of its exclusive economic zone, a maritime territory extending up to 200 nautical miles offshore. Nairobi argued the ICJ does not have jurisdiction over the case, but was overruled in 2017. In March this year, Kenya stayed away from the hearings, citing the coronavirus pandemic. And just 2 weeks ago, Kenya notified the UN Secretary General it was withdrawing from the ICJ's compulsory jurisdiction.
Kenya shall no longer be subject to an international court or tribunal without its expressed consent.
The long-running dispute has tested relations between the neighbors, and many believe after Tuesday's ruling by the ICJ, relations between Kenya and Somalia are bound to get tested further. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's hear more now from Robin Churchill, Emeritus Professor of International Law at Dundee University in Scotland. He's joining us via Zoom. Thank you for joining us on Africa Live. And now, the International Court of Justice has handed in its ruling. What is the impact of that ruling?
Good evening. Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I do want to get a feeling from you about the impact of that ruling from the International Court of Justice, which has handed in that long-awaited judgment on the maritime border dispute between Kenya and Somalia.
Yes, the court this afternoon drew the maritime boundary between Kenya and Somalia. Kenya had argued that the boundary ought to be the line of latitude going through the land terminus of the land boundary between Kenya and Somalia wanted the boundary to be an equidistance line between Kenya and Somalia. And in fact, the court didn't accept either of those propositions. It drew the boundary line somewhere in between those two positions. So neither side got everything it was asking for, but that's fairly standard when international courts draw maritime boundaries. They do tend to draw something between what each party is asking for.
So, Professor, does this have much impact, though, for either of the countries, particularly Kenya, which has said that, which had withdrew from the ICJ?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the question again.
I do want to get a feeling from you. Does this ruling have much of an impact?
Well, it will have an impact on where oil companies can drill. In the past, Kenya has authorized some oil companies to drill in areas which are now part of Somalia's maritime area. So that could affect Kenya's petroleum activities in the future.
All right, Professor Robin Churchill joining us there via Zoom from Scotland. Thank you. The trial of a former Central African Republic militia commander, Mahamat Said, continues. Said was a faction commander for the Seleka militia. ICC prosecutor Karim Khan alleges Said took part in beating and mistreating prisoners. The prosecution alleges that Said ran 2 detention centers at the time of the crimes. The prisoners were accused of supporting ousted President Francois Bozize. Said was arrested in January and transferred to The Hague. He faces accusations of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The current hearing is set to end on Wednesday.
This is as straightforward a case as is likely to come before this court. This is not a case where Your Honours are going to be challenged to look at complicated theories of liability of a military commander or a civilian superior removed from the theatre of conflict. It is a detention case. And we say the evidence overwhelmingly shows that Mr. Said was in the room where it happened. He encouraged it, he facilitated it, but he also took part in beatings and mistreatment that justifies the forms of participation that are put in the document containing charges.
La réalité à l'OCRB.
The reality of the Central Office for the Prevention of Banditry is total disorganization. In such total disorganization, no one can clearly be identified as being in charge. It's impossible. Mr. Said, as a volunteer trying to assist OCRB Commander Louis Mazangwe, is in or no way responsible for what other people will do, claiming to be in various positions. In such context of disorder, it will be impossible for the prosecution to prove the existence of any policy, of a state or organization or any common plan.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. Sudan's increased insecurity poses a major challenge to the transitional government. And Libya's Joint Military Commission backs a plan to evacuate foreign fighters.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Kidnappings, organized crime and gun violence are just some of the causes of the increased insecurity that's been posing problems for the transitional government of Sudan since Omar al-Bashir was overthrown as head of state 2.5 years ago. The tough economic challenges in a country with triple-digit inflation have also contributed to a sense of unease. But as Naba Mohideen reports, security challenges are making day-to-day life even more difficult for many residents of Sudan's capital, Khartoum.
Residents of the capital, Khartoum, say kidnappings, theft and organized crime have become more prevalent, worse now than in recent memory. And they say the government is not doing enough to deal with the insecurity.
We used to open very early and close late. Now we can't do that because of the lax security. We tried to get licensed guns to protect ourselves and our shops, but authorities stopped issuing new licenses. This situation is frightening and new, but if the police made checkpoints in the main streets, they could put a stop to the crime.
Sudan's economy has been hit hard, and the inflation rate in the country soared to over 400% in 2021, compared to 50% in 2019. According to officials, the crime rate has shot up too. A government report says tens of thousands of crime were reported this year, including murders, armed theft and looting. Shopkeepers throughout the city say they are suffering the impact of crime.
The security situation has affected our business. Before this fragile time, we were working and staying open late, and families were able to come here and shop in this market. Now everybody is worried. Our business is not good now.
Insecurity has increased at a time when a political crisis, due to differences between the military and civilian rulers, has also affected the nation. People have taken to the streets, demanding increased political representation in the new government. The current transitional government blames people loyal to the deposed president, saying Bashir's loyalists are planning crimes to undermine Sudan's transitional government. Analysts say several factors are worsening the insecurity problem in the country.
I think it's normal to see such loose security and fragility during transitional periods. In Sudan, there's a comprehensive transition after 30 years of iron fist rule of the previous government, and the rulers need to put security arrangements in place to defeat the growing fragility.
The transitional government and a coalition of rebel leaders signed a peace deal in August 2020, more than a year after the coup that toppled al-Bashir. And the many rebel groups included all have a presence with armies in the capital, contributing to a sense of lawlessness. During a visit this year, U.S. diplomats urged Sudan's transitional government to integrate the forces into one military. The capital has also witnessed terror attacks for the first time in decades, and security agents were killed in confrontations with alleged Islamic State militants last month.
Sudanese are scheduled to go to the polls next year in elections that hold the promise of democratic change in Sudan. For now, it's a promise only, while many Sudanese worry about their safety as they go about their daily business. Naba Mohideen, CGTN, Khartoum, Sudan.
Libya's Joint Military Commission has backed a plan to evacuate foreign fighters and mercenaries from Libya. The UN support mission in Libya has described the step as a historic achievement. On Monday, 5 Western countries also welcomed the move. Representatives of the rival military forces have agreed on a balanced withdrawal process for the fighters. The plan, however, does not include a deadline for the exit of the groups. CGTN's Adam Mahrui has more details.
In a joint statement released by their embassies in Libya on Monday, France, Germany, Italy, UK and the United States have welcomed the signing of a Libyan action plan to evacuate foreign fighters. The 5+5 Joint Military Commission reached a UN-sponsored agreement over a comprehensive plan that should see the gradual, balanced and sequenced process of the withdrawal of mercenaries, foreign fighters and foreign forces from Libyan territory.
There are many fighters from different nationalities all over Libya. The evacuation and that of other mercenaries must take place in a way that preserves military balance and secures the ceasefire. The military commission wants to create trust between Libyans. It's why they insisted to make the evacuation gradual.
This means that the evacuation of fighters will not take place all at once in a rapid manner. They will evacuate in phases based on the developments in Libya. Both mercenaries and foreign fighters like the Turkish forces, which the previous government of national accord resorted to, will be evacuated at the same time from all Libyan regions.
The agreement, however, which the United Nations support mission in Libya described as historic, did not announce a deadline for the evacuation of foreign fighters.
The absence of a deadline is an obstacle. It also signals that the evacuation plan remains unclear. More importantly, there are no guarantees that these forces would leave. The international community, through the Security Council, must be clear and must announce consequences for those who don't support the evacuation of fighters from Libya.
The UN sees the presence of foreign fighters and mercenaries in Libya as one of the biggest threats to the ongoing political process. Earlier UN-sponsored agreements between Libyans agreed that all sides work towards evacuating all foreign troops before the December 24 elections. Some experts believe that Libyans might not be able to lead the evacuation process on their own.
The NATO and US AFRICOM could be among the forces that monitor the evacuation of foreign fighters and mercenaries. The whole world, including the United States, Russia and China, the permanent members in the Security Council, must intervene to end this catastrophe of fighters in Libya. That must happen without any condition. It's the only way Libya will be saved.
Last week, Libya's Foreign Minister Najla Al-Mangoush confirmed that some mercenaries have been evacuated. She described the move, however, as a very modest start.
There is no doubt that much more needs to be done in Libya to evacuate all armed individuals who threaten Libya's stability. There are already many obstacles standing against the road to elections. If these foreign fighters engage in any act of hostilities, Libya could once again descend into a civil war. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
The UN Human Rights Office has called for a prompt, thorough, impartial and independent investigation into the use of force by Libyan authorities against migrants and asylum seekers. The announcement comes after armed forces in Tripoli conducted a series of mass arrests last week. More than 4,000 people have been detained in overcrowded detention centers. Nokutula Shabalala has that story.
Since Sunday, hundreds of migrants and refugees have been waiting outside a United Nations center in Tripoli. They are looking for help to escape Libya. That's following a violent crackdown in which thousands were arrested.
Last week, there was a series of major incidents beginning on October 1st, when Ministry of Interior personnel raided an informal settlement in Gergaresh, about 12 kilometers west from the capital, Tripoli, where hundreds of migrants and asylum seekers live, including people registered with the UN Refugee Agency, who were waiting completion of their resettlement procedures.
The UN's Human Rights Office says women, children and men were taken in handcuffs by Libyan security forces. At least one person died, 5 were injured and more than 4,000 were detained. The Human Rights Organization has slammed the use of force.
We call on the authorities to establish prompt, thorough, impartial, and independent investigations into the claims of unnecessary and disproportionate use of force, including the allegations of killings by the security forces and affiliated groups, with a view to hold those responsible accountable. Victims have the right to justice and reparations. We also call on the Libyan authorities to release all arbitrarily detained migrants and asylum seekers, seize their rights on their settlements and halt evicting them, as well as stop criminalizing them.
Libya became a major transit point for people seeking to reach Europe. But migrants say they have faced violent abuse and extortion in the North African country.
We are extremely worried about the continued suffering of migrants and asylum seekers in Libya, who are experiencing a myriad of daily violations and abuses at the hands of both state and non-state actors.
Libya's government of national unity says they are trying to deal with the complex issue of illegal migration. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
In Africa, there's been a rise in the number of women serving in top political positions, the most recent being Tunisia's first woman prime minister. But the case is different for Nigeria, where there seems to be a visible gender gap in political representation. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam tells us more.
Aminat Adeniran heads one of the busiest markets in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. For over a decade, she has run a flourishing natural herbs business here, and she's defying the odds as a woman in this male-dominated market. She feels Nigeria's patriarchal society has inhibited many women from aspiring for top government positions.
As we know mentality of our Nigeria men, they will say men are the head of the house, that they will not want women to rule them, that if women can go to the post of governor, or that she will look down on her husband.
Women constitute about 47% of the total electorate, yet the nation still ranks 133rd out of 149 countries achieving gender parity. That's according to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index.
Another thing that is affecting political aspiration in Nigeria for women is religion. They have a way of telling women what to do, what not to do, what will make you a bad woman, what will make you not stand out like a woman.
Nigeria has produced some outstanding women in leadership and politics. World Trade Organization boss Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala and Deputy UN Chief Amina Mohammed are among them. Still, the West African nation has seen a steady decline in women's participation in governance. Currently, out of 469 national lawmakers, only 29 of them are women.
It's before they will say all women education end in the kitchen. Not nowadays. It will not end in the kitchen. I know it's our right to go to the kitchen, but when it's time for us to prove ourselves, government should give us chance. They should encourage us. They should not look down on women.
I think we just have to stand up and want that thing. We cannot sit down at home and think the political office will come to us. It doesn't work that way. But the best way to start up politics is to start from your grassroots, your constituency, get mixed up with the people, know people, care for them.
Although there are no laws restricting women from vying for any office, many women still shy away from going into politics. Experts suggest political parties support, train and mentor women to take key leadership roles. They believe doing so will give way to politics of inclusion. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Let's now take a look at your business news. Here's Ramanyang with that.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business. Remittance flows into Egypt have gone up by 70% amid a global economic recovery after the pandemic-induced downturn. And Kenya's maize prices are down by over a quarter as harvesting season starts in the nation's maize-growing basket.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography. and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
China's coastal industrial centers see new potential, with manufacturing flourishing by the sea. From protecting the ocean environment to boosting the marine economy, new innovations seek sustainable development. Along the coast of the Yellow Sea and the Bohai Sea, CGTN presents Tides of Change Part 3, our ultimate trip to discover a promising future.
Welcome back. Let's start in East Africa. Maize prices at the farm gate in Kenya have gone down by 26% as the harvesting season starts in the country's breadbasket, signalling a decline to come in consumer prices, particularly as far as flour is concerned. The price of a 90-kilogram bag of maize has fallen from 2,700 shillings to about 2,000 shillings in Kenya's Rift Valley. That's the country's maize-producing basket. The inflow of imports from Uganda, which is rampant in Western Kenya, has also been a factor in pushing prices even lower. Kenya's Agriculture Ministry is forecasting that maize output will drop by around 20% or so this year, following delays in grain harvesting and the effects of an armyworm infestation too. The declining cost of the staple, though, will be quite the reprieve to households which are struggling with the high cost of other basic items, including fuel and electricity. Up north, the Central Bank of Egypt says that remittances from Egyptians working abroad went up by over 13% to about $3.7 billion in the 2020-2021 fiscal year, compared to the $27.8 billion recorded in the previous year. According to the central bank, transfers went up by nearly 30% to about $8.1 billion in the second quarter, compared to $6.2 billion in the same period in 2020. Additionally, remittance flows went up at an annual rate of 15.5% in June to reach $2.9 billion. Compare that to $2.6 billion in June 2020. Egypt's government says it's continuously working on rejuvenating the economy by raising incomes and increasing investment in sectors it sees as top priorities. The price of Bitcoin, the largest and arguably the oldest cryptocurrency, has extended its two-week rally, climbing to the highest level since early May. The cryptocurrency last traded more than 3% higher, 57,530 a unit, after hitting as high as 57,740. Now, the comeback comes amid increasing hopes and some interesting expectations that Bitcoin futures ETFs could be soon approved. Now, that, along with recent comments from the heads of the U.S. Federal Reserve and the Securities and Exchange Commission, who say they have no intention of banning Bitcoin, as we've seen in other markets like China, for example, seemed to embolden investors. Bitcoin is now up nearly 30% so far in the month, 95% for the year. Analysts are expecting that this rally might be the door for another all-time high. Kenya's floral exports are blooming once again after the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic led to the shutdown of key markets in Europe. Flower exports do constitute a major foreign exchange earner for the East African nation, raking at least $1.3 billion in 2019. CGTN's Wanja Mungai attended Kenya's annual flower festival in Nairobi and filed this report.
Kenya has earned a reputation as one of the world's flower capitals. Coming in form of vibrant colors, succulents, and a tropical bloom, flowers have become the country's second biggest export after tea. Flower enthusiasts, including florists and vendors, showcased elegant floral designs at the annual Kenya Flower Festival, which resumed this year after the pandemic disrupted the event in 2020.
The festival is actually a platform that is allowing the florists to mingle with the growers, and the idea is actually to ensure that the local market, is well represented as well. Because we are celebrated out there in the world. We need to celebrate our own Kenyan-made produce.
And a unique celebration it was. More so for flower enthusiasts and investors who dread to see the petals wither and appreciate lasting solutions instead.
Amir Mangia, has preserved flowers that can last months and even years.
It's everlasting, so this is something that is different from what Kenya we have, including the fresh flowers. So we're more preserved and we last more longer, and there's quite a lot we can do. We can change colors, we can take textures, we can put in scents, and yeah, there's quite a lot to do.
Having been in the flower business for 30 years, Lydia Kang'ethe believes the festival is timely in boosting sales and enhancing creativity among florists.
We are the leading exporter of flowers, so by extension, we should also be leaders in the designing and arranging of events.
She also owns high-end cut flower shops in the capital, Nairobi.
The main clients as of now, compared to when we started, they are more of the local people, because this is the place where I started my arranging when I joined the family business, and lots of our clients at that time were Europeans and Asians. But now it's come down to the local Kenyan, and people are appreciating flowers a lot more.
Some of Kenya's main cut flower exports includes varieties like roses, carnations, lilies, hypersium, and Geisophilia. Kenya is ranked as Africa's leading exporter of cut flowers to the European market, and roses particularly make up 38% of those exports. The Netherlands is the biggest destination for Kenya cut flowers, followed by the United Kingdom, the United Arab Emirates, and Germany. The Kenya floriculture market is projected to register a compound annual growth rate of 4.7 during the forecast period 2021 to 2026, a boom for the industry after the COVID-induced fallout.
The market is actually opening up. Weddings have started opening up. We have South Africa already starting their events, have now opened up to more than 750 packs per event. So I think weddings are now thriving, and as we get to the season of Christmas and celebration, definitely the flower industry is thriving.
Lady Bird Johnson once said that when flowers bloom, so does hope. And this year's flower festival seems to communicate just that, with the theme, When Hope Blossoms. Wanja Mungai, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
The International Monetary Fund says the global economic recovery does continue, but the momentum of that recovery has weakened significantly. According to its latest World Economic Outlook report, the IMF's global growth projections for 2021 have been revised down marginally to about 5.9%. Pandemic outbreaks in critical links in global supply chains have resulted in longer than expected supply disruptions, and that's feeding inflation in many a country. The downgrade to the US is due to large inventory drawdowns in the second quarter, partly reflecting supply disruptions and a slowdown in consumption over there as well. The downgrade in Germany, that's in part due to manufacturing output challenges. China's prospects for 2021 are marked down slightly due to stronger than anticipated scaling back of public investment. Oil prices in the meantime have continued to rise this week amid fears of a global energy crunch. The global benchmark Brent crude stands at around $83.60 a barrel as of 13:30 GMT today. On Monday, it actually went as high as $84.60, the highest since October 2018. WTI crude, the benchmark across the Atlantic in the US, that remains around 7-year highs. OPEC and its allied producers say soaring prices are due to widespread global energy shortages. The EU's decision to switch to oil for power generation has also spurred this price hike, because remember, they're having a bit of a problem getting the gas they need. Despite the recovery of pandemic-hit economies boosting demand, OPEC and its allies recently said they will stick to their cautious plan to increase supply very gradually. Now, Europe has been facing the spectre of rising fuel prices since the first week of this month. Natural gas prices in Europe have gone up by 600%. Gas stocks have fallen to a 10-year low. Combined, all of these have triggered fears of an impending fuel crisis in winter. Nearly 90% of the continent's gas supplies are imported. EU officials say Russia didn't step up supplies, while Russia's President Vladimir Putin says the country has been boosting supplies in order to stabilize the market. Away from energy matters, the Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi is hosting a special summit of the G20 economies to discuss developments in Afghanistan. That meeting is scheduled as worries grow about a looming humanitarian disaster in the wake of the Taliban's return to power in August. The video conference will focus on aid needs, concerns over security and ways of guaranteeing safe passage abroad for thousands of Western allied Afghans who are still in the country. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is due to join the summit, underlining the central role given to the UN in tackling the crisis, in part because many countries don't want to set up direct relations with the Taliban. And I'll leave it there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. We'll be heading over to Zimbabwe. There's concern there that the currency is in danger of collapsing as companies resort to using the US dollar for transactions amid a crackdown by the government on parallel currency trading. Scores of traders, in fact, have been arrested over the last few weeks for being allegedly involved in this parallel trading of the American dollar. But the government has threatened to suspend licenses of businesses as well, using parallel market rates to price their goods and services. What's going on in Zimbabwe and how can the country solve this problem? We'll explore that live from Harare at the top of the hour. For now, back to Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's coming up in your sports news. Uganda celebrates International Squash Day with festivities in the capital, Kampala.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Uganda joined the rest of the global squash fraternity to commemorate the World Squash Day on 9th October. As a sport, squash is still struggling to find a foothold in Uganda, but the prospect of it being an Olympic sport could help change that, as Leon Sinyange reports.
Mande Aliho has been playing squash for 34 years now, and at 60 years old, he is still just as competitive.
Squash is life. You can play it as long as you live.
Following closely 16-year-old Stephen Johnson, he recently picked up interest in the sport.
It's good. It's as in you're playing at the same time you're doing exercise, so yeah.